Can we also chat to the people?
Yes, we can absolutely type in the chat bar. Hi,
Okay.
everyone. This is Jen. I'm Jen with Two Rivers Books and Weird Sisters Yarn. I am here with DJ Lee, author of Remote, Finding Home in the Bitterroots. DJ is a native of the Pacific Northwest and a professor at the University of Washington. Her
Washington
book,
State.
Washington State, thank
Yeah.
you. Washington State University. Her book is a memoir about growing up in and around the Bitterroots and her family there, her family history there. And also with Tina Antavaros, who is the author of Rough House. Tina has been a bookseller in Hood River and is a professor of creative writing with Hood River Community College. Sorry about that. A professor at Hood River of creative writing at Hood River Community College. Her book is a memoir also of growing up in the Pacific Northwest. I'm very excited to hear more about both of these. Before we jump into that though, little heads up about a couple of exciting things we have coming up in the next week or so at the shop. We have a Netflix and Chillers series of events that is going to be starting on September 29th. 5 Tuesdays in a row, we are going to be watching kind of like a book club, but with movies. We're going to watch a scary movie, and then we're going to get together and work on Halloween themed knitting and crocheting and other fiber art patterns while we discuss the movies. And on September 26th, which is a Saturday, we are going to be running an outdoor market focusing on health and self-care, reconnecting with ourselves and our taking care of ourselves. So we hope to see you at both of those. The outdoor market will be across the street from the shop on North Chicago Avenue between Lombard and Kellogg. And details for joining the knit along will be on our website as soon as we decide what platform we're using. Go ahead and check out both of those there. With that, I'm going to hand it over.
So do you want one of us to read first?
Yeah, go ahead, DJ.
Okay, so my book is Remote, Finding Home in the Bitterroots. And I'll just brief introduction, as briefest as I can do. It's about 15 years ago, my grandmother passed away. And when she was on her deathbed, she gave me this box full of articles and photographs and like news clippings. And she was gone, and I was trained as an archivist, as a historian. And so when I saw this box, I just thought, oh, this is like a family archive. And there was a lot about my family that, I didn't know. One being that they'd been connected to the Selway Bitterroot, the land that's now the Selway Bitterroot, for almost a century. And so I kind of felt like my grandmother was asking me to explore this place that I had no idea even existed until she was gone. And so I basically spent 15 years exploring the place physically, on foot, horse and mule, bush plane. I volunteered back there. I did over 50 oral history interviews with the people who had worked and lived there over the years. I researched every corner, every archive I could find, and every corner of the country to find documents and other materials. I thought I was writing a story just about the history of this landscape, but it turned out that I couldn't help but write my own story and narrative along with it. And so the book is non-linear. It goes back and forth in time. goes back to ancient time, goes back to the Salish and the Nimipu, who used the land for at least 12,000 years, maybe longer, and the geologic history, as well as the more recent history of the miners and the early foresters, and people like my grandparents who lived back there in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I'm just going to read, because Tina and Jen and I were talking about, one of the things that Jen's book, Tina's book, and mine have in common is that we are, interested in how our parents, how their narratives help shape our narrative. And so I'm just going to read a tiny bit about one memory that I had that kind of always stuck with me. And so it ended up being part of the book here. So, and this is when my mother, my two brothers, and my grandmother were at a grocery store in Lewiston, Idaho. There had been other times when my mother and my versions of events clashed, like the day she misplaced one of my brothers. I was all of 6 years old. We were at a grocery store and had returned to our car when my mother said, "Where's Michael?" referring to the 2-year-old. I remembered her hair was thick. I remembered her hair was tied back in a thick pony, and her eyes squinted behind heavy cat-eye glasses as she screamed panicked sounds, barely words, telling me to hang on to the grocery cart while my grandmother, who happened to be visiting, held the other brother. I fought to steady the metal basket, confused, searching for some reassurance on my grandmother's face, but finding only the nervous twitch of her lips. It wasn't long before my mother came back to the car carrying the toddler and laughing. Yes, laughing. She'd been striding the aisles, she said through attempts at catching her breath, calling his name when she realized he was right there on her hip. I was carrying him all along, she said, her voice shining. I had replayed the scene over the years, adding layers of meaning until the memory became a parable. Neither I nor my grandmother noticed my brother on my mother's hip before she ran back into the store. Why? For a long time, I thought my mother's terror had so saturated the moment that we accepted her version of reality. She was like that, my mother, powerful. Later, I believe the story showed how she and my brothers were joined at the hip, so much so that their connection went unnoticed, how all of us children were bone of her bone, the hip, the pelvis, the body's meeting place, the center of life, holding together the spine and the legs, the heart and the feet. That was my mother too. Still later, I came to think of the lost brother as an artistic awakening. Because as my mother ran back to the store, I wasn't actually worried about her and my brother as much as mesmerized by the slow unfolding of the moment. It was the first time I felt life turn to story as it was happening and understood the power I had in shaping the narrative. Thank you.
This is amazing, DJ. Does that mean I'm supposed to read now?
I think, oh, there you go.
There I am. Do you guys have an echo? Okay. I just have a little bit of an echo, so wanted to make sure that it wasn't a problem anybody else was having. Hi, I'm Tina. Thank you, DJ. That was beautiful. I love that part in your book. I felt very familiar to me because, like, how many times as a mother do you sort of
but you have moments
your child, even though
but you do have moments like that where you reflect on how story is shaped by you and shapes you. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you read.
And I don't know about you, but moments where you recognize yourself doing it to your own children.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so hi, I'm Tina, and I have a book called Rough House. And it is about mostly about my dad, Lloyd, who was a migrant timber worker in the late 70s, or actually all of the 80s and the early 90s. And when I was born, we migrated all over the Pacific Northwest. We never lived anywhere for more than a few months. And so my relationship with him was always sort of played out in different settings. And he was also, unfortunately, an addict, and that made things exciting. And so we left him, and after that, whenever I would go back to him, we would be living in a different place. So it was just kind of always an adventure. So I'm just going to read a really short part from before we left him, when I was a young child, and thinking of trying my headphones, you guys, because this echo is really irritating. Can you hear me, DJ?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
It's any better. Okay, so the only thing you really need to know about this section is that, let's see, is there any setup here? Oh yes, the only thing you need to know is that when I say the mansion, I am referring to a trailer that we had. We spent most of my first 5 years, the four of us, living in a 16-foot camp trailer that we pulled around. And finally, my mom told my dad she'd had enough and made him buy us a bigger trailer. So when I say the mansion, I'm referring to this larger camp trailer. We lived in so many small mill towns in my first 5 years. Randall, Packwood, Morton, CQ, Sandpoint, and more. We lived in trailers, cabins, one-room studios, more trailers. Mom finally convinced Lloyd to settle down in Clallam Bay, Washington, before Jesse started first grade. Crown Zellerbach was the second largest lumber company shaving the surface of the Pacific Northwest back then, and Lloyd was lucky enough to get on their payroll. He was proud to be a company man, though it wouldn't last. For many years, I'd feel that pride linger a moment whenever I saw a white metal Crown Zellerbach paper towel dispenser in a public bathroom. When we first got to Clallam Bay, we lived in the mansion. Before long, we sold it and rented a big double wide in a trailer park on a bluff looking down on the ocean. This was the kind of trailer that actually needs some furniture. It wasn't all built in. Sometimes when Mom wanted to make dinner in peace or go to the laundromat alone, Lloyd would say, "You kids want to go on a wander?" He meant a walk on the beach. There was never a time we didn't want to go. I could have a bellyache and a fever and I'd still go on a wander. We'd walk on that beach with Lloyd as long as he'd let us, no matter how cold our faces or fierce the wind. I had a powder blue pea coat with polyester white fur lining that I thought was so pretty, though it had belonged to another girl before me. It wasn't even a little bit water resistant, but I didn't care. You know how sometimes you're listening to a song you love, and all you can think about is restarting that same song as soon as it's over? That's what it was like to walk on the beach with my dad. Lloyd stopped often to stoop down and point things out along the shore. He'd gather seashells or bits of interesting flotsam. Not just gather, consider. He might hold up a piece of broken shell and ask, "What's that look like to you, hun?" He was truly interested in our interpretations. He'd ask if I could imagine it as the head, foot, or body of one of his seashell creatures. He used a hot glue gun to put together shells and create silly figures, some on 2 legs, some on 4, 6, or 8. He'd add plastic googly eyes and take them down to a tourist shop and sell them. Our beach walks were collecting missions to gather shells, driftwood, moss, and rocks for his critters. But it was about more than collecting. Lloyd would hold up a piece of driftwood and ask us to look at the way the sea had shaped it. We discovered mermaids, dragons, wiener dogs. Driftwood can be anything, and Lloyd never got tired of that idea. It's just plain wood, but also a tadpole, a giant's pointer finger, a long, skinny Ford pickup truck. He taught us to compare today's landscape with yesterday's, to observe the way the ocean kept on changing the lines of our walking. Nothing's stronger than the power of the sea. Nothing's got more slow patience. Not the coastline with its craggy bluffs, not the mountains, not the woods. I lived in a small body then, and when Lloyd knelt down to talk to me, to show me the miracle of an unbroken sand dollar or newly forming inlet, he looked like a man at prayer. What I mean to say is that he made me feel like I deserved to take up space. From his moments of careful attention, I learned to expect some amount of worship from the world. From his violence, desperate apologies, and absences, I would discover that the same sparkling fires that fueled his creativity could burn out of control, leaving a landscape stripped of life. Lloyd would hurt and fail me 100 ways, but first he taught me to wonder, gave me love without condition, and moments where I felt holy. Hi, DJ.
Beautiful. I love
I've
that
got
part
really
too.
bad echo, so I'm sorry if I'm
sorry.
halting.
You sound very articulate to me. I halt naturally, so we can
You're
halt.
an angel.
So Jen, are we just supposed to, are you going to ask us questions now? Or do we,
I do have some questions that I've got prepared for you. There was one question asked in our Ask a Question feature, which got repeated in the chat, and I think you answered it, asking how your brother DJ remembered the event in the parking lot. It sounds like you're not sure he did. He does remember it.
I don't think he did because he was only 2. But I've talked to him a lot about, some of the stories that I was writing, and he just has a totally different take on family history. I mean, he said to me once, he said, if something happened in the past, why would I need to talk about it? Like, why would I need to process it and think about it again? And I just was looking at him thinking, oh, how did you get that sensibility? And I was tortured with the need to revisit things and reinterpret them and look at them from different perspectives and dig up more information. And he is just the most amazing human, that brother. Well, I love all my brothers, but that one is, he's just so great, Michael. So yeah. I don't think he remembers it, but that is a good question. Tina and I were sort of batting this question around. Like, if you're writing about family, do you check with them about events and say, is this the way it happened? Do you let them read your material?
And I think we both approach it very differently.
Yeah.
Well, first I'm going to say that my brother feels the same way your brother did, where he would, I think at first when I started exploring all this, he was kind of like, why do we need to relive that? Like, wasn't once enough? So, but yes, I guess I'll go first on that question. Yes, I did actually, because there's a lot about Lloyd, my dad, that was magical and amazing, and I really wanted to make sure I represented that part of him. But there was also a lot that was abusive. Mm-hmm. And because my mom and my brother were also victims, I felt that I wanted to give them the chance to read anything that I was going to publish before I published it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did the opposite. I didn't let I let one person read the manuscript. I have a character named Dick. I mean, he's a real human too, but he's a character in the book named Dick Walker. I did let him read the book. I was a little nervous because he and I have a sort of antagonistic relationship. I have an antagonistic relationship with a lot of people in the book. Maybe that says something more about me than the people, but and I was like afraid he was going to make me change. He was going to say, no, it didn't. But he was just like, no, it wasn't 20 feet. It was 40 feet. And I was like, oh God, okay, I'll change that. But one of my friends was reminding me that Joan Didion, in her essay on keeping a notebook, said that when she wrote events, some family members would say, no, it didn't happen that way, or no, it wasn't a black spider, it was a blue lizard or whatever. And she said, I wrote down what she said. She said, very likely they're right. For not only have I always had trouble distinguishing between what happened and what merely might have happened, but I remain unconcerned that the distinction for my purposes matters. I don't quite feel that way, but I know what she's saying, that you're trying to represent a truth. And so little details, like if it's a black spider or a blue lizard, may not matter. My thinking was that I wanted to be held accountable for the story I wrote about people that were still alive and who are not still alive. And so I knew that I needed to be generous. I knew I needed to be harder on myself than I did on the other people in the book, because that's part of what memoir is exploring your own flaws and your own blind spots and biases. And so I did tell my mother a lot of times. I said, here's what I'm writing. And she would say, you can write whatever you want, it's your story. But I still, I still held, I didn't let her read it because I wanted to be the one to be accountable. And my mom is such a powerful storyteller herself. I just wanted it to be my version. And I'm sure that her view of things and her words are throughout it anyway, because I'm just so influenced by her storytelling. She's like a master storyteller. So.
Well, it's funny that you say the part about how it's your experience is what you're writing, not anybody else's, and like what Joan Didion said. Yeah. I remember the first time my brother read a draft of the book, I said, does it all feel true? Like, what, I've got my pen out. Like, was that the wrong model of car? Like, I want to fix things like that.
Yeah.
And he said, even when you have things that are wrong in my mind, like factually wrong, they just feel true. They feel like how you experienced it. But I was like, still tell me those things. Because I always say to my students that I'm not a very good writer. I'm just a really, really good reviser. And so I wasn't so afraid of somebody telling me I needed to change something, because it seems like almost every time I engage with it, it gets a little better. So I was like, just those two. I wanted those two people to read it and to tell me if I was getting anything wrong. Where are the soft spots?
Well, and
like
then
you said, I need to look at when I'm the jerk too.
Yeah, right. And I, the other thing with writing about Dick and my mother is, where we argue a lot, then I end up feeling sorry for myself, which is a terrible habit that I'm trying to, at 60 years old, I'm trying to break. But, without those conflicts, the book would be flat, right? So the conflicts actually help reveal character, the character of other people.
Yeah, because that's a part of the story in Remote.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know. I mean, I also think that, all story is exaggeration, because we're selecting events and stitching them together. So we just know, and all good storytellers exaggerate. So that's just, I would tell my mother that too, a lot of it's exaggerated. And she's like, yeah, that's what storytellers do. They select and emphasize, and things take shape, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jen, we took over your question.
No, that's fine. You're here. Backtracking a little bit, I think you touched on this, Tina. Perrin Kearns was asking kind of the same question about, does your family remember your stories differently, particularly your brother?
So there was never a big, major disagreement between my brother and I. And both my brother and my mom, which I don't think either of them are here tonight, both of them, when they read the manuscript, were just tearful and grateful. They felt like they felt like they'd been able to be in Lloyd's presence again, which was a gift. And it was honestly a very beautiful thing. But there was an interesting thing that happened. My mom says to me, Tina, that one thing that you wrote, it didn't happen quite like that. And it turned out that this way I had written this violent episode between my parents, I was very young, so I think my memory had just mixed together a couple of different stories.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I had written it was factually incorrect. But what made it horrific was that I had given copies of the manuscript to both my mom and my brother, and she's a much faster reader than he is. So she was through it, and she says, Tina, it didn't happen that way, and it was something violent my dad had done to my brother.
Oh.
And your brother was asleep when he did it.
Oh.
And so I realized in that moment that my brother didn't know about this thing he was going to read. And so that was a big one. Like, I called him, I was like, Mom, you need to tell him. And she was like, oh, I don't know, honey. Because you know how it is, DJ. So I had to call my brother and be like, guess what? And then, of course, I rewrote it because I'm with you. Like, we're stitching together. We represent truth by picking and choosing.
Mm-hmm.
But if there were little things like that I got wrong, I wanted to fix them.
Yeah, right. And then it has a different emphasis in the book and has a different meaning,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, you and I are dealing with such different, because a lot of mine, I'm a child.
Right.
And so my memory is probably less reliable. So I probably sort of needed to rely on other witnesses more than you did.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I feel like my mom is the hero of the book. She might not see it that way, but I really feel like she is.
I feel like she is too.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, and I mean, her position is interesting because she's not only a character, she's like the person she's kind of like the through line. She's one of the major arcs, but she also was someone that I talked to throughout the process, asking her questions about what happened and about how she felt and what she remembered. And then we backpacked back there many times. I do feel like the writing of the book brought us closer as mother and daughter than we ever would have become had it not happened. So for that, I'm very grateful.
And did she finish it? Because I remember you telling me that she took a break.
Yeah. I think she finished it. Yeah.
Because it really is at the end that you recognize she's the hero.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how, I mean, I'm a literature professor. I've been studying literature for 40 years, right? I know how narrative arcs go. So I couldn't make her the hero. It has to have an arc. Yeah.
All right, Jen, what you got for us next?
I'm muting myself in case I need to type in between so that I'm not clacking over top of you. So I have a few questions that we can absolutely use to fill time. Anyone who's watching, please feel free to ask your questions too.
We had a really nice comment. Each book sounds so powerful, and what a privilege to have each writer share their writing, from Kim Stafford. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim Stafford.
Hi, Perrin. Hi, Kim. Good to see you guys.
How does your writing inform your teaching?
How does your writing inform your teaching?
Tina.
That's probably a really big one for me. I mean, I guess I don't know if it's my writing so much as in both my writing and my teaching, I'm always kind of coming at everything from this kind of angle, I guess, of social class. And writing my book, to me, was a lot about giving voice to people that I think often aren't heard. People like my dad wouldn't be considered a good parent. But I think that I wouldn't be better off without him. And I also think a lot of the challenges that we faced, both of my parents faced, had to do with generational poverty and the constant sort of hardship. And so that's a huge sort of kind of guiding force for me as a teacher as well, is like how many of these students are it was as hard for them to get into this college classroom as it was for me, right? And how much of their voice feels like I remember when I first sat in a college class at a community college, I just kept my mouth shut. I felt like my speech was ugly, like I wasn't invited into an academic space. And so that's something that's just like always on my mind when I'm teaching. What
Wow,
about you, DJ?
yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure you must be a wonderful teacher for a lot of students with having that level of sensitivity. That's amazing. I've been teaching for so long. Oh my gosh, I've been teaching for like almost 40 years. And I look back at some of the things I taught at the beginning and I just cringe, you know. I think that I always teach at the edge, at the frontier of my knowledge. So I'm not teaching what I knew. I'm teaching what I just barely know and want to know more. That said, I think that going through the MFA program, which I did, I mean, I started out as a scholar and then I went back and got an MFA, and the MFA program at Bennington, and there's another person on here from Bennington, so Vicky, and so she knows what the editing is incredible. Like the level of editing that is taught to you in an MFA program, like the developmental editing as well as the line editing. I can't believe that I taught for so many years without being able to give that to my students. So I spend a lot of time on my students' work, just in developmental and line editing. And I just feel like it has to be individual. And I used to just like think, oh, you could just put stuff up on the whiteboard or whatever and just teach everyone at the same time. But writing is so individual. So it's really increased my workload a lot. Yeah.
I think you said Vicky from Bennington. Hi, Vicky. I know that Vicky too.
You do?
Yeah, she's in my writing group.
Oh,
so we haven't been able to get together with COVID.
Cool. Isn't that the connections are amazing? And Tina and I both lived in Yakima at different times, and yeah.
And I was born in Idaho, where
right. And all the Sandpoint stuff. Like I just could picture every place in your book. It was so cool. I loved it. Yeah. I love this. I highlighted one thing here. Well, this was you said, I can't say for sure what town we lived in when he taught me to ride a bike. This is from the first chapter. Just like I can't be sure. We were in Yakima the summer. Yeah. He had the vintage bike with the clown horn. Jesse can't say either, though he thinks I learned to ride a bike in Randall. Mom isn't sure if I learned before she left Lloyd or after. It's difficult to place memories in a childhood of migrations. This is what it was like to be Lloyd's daughter. I was always collecting evidence, memorizing moments, eavesdropping on stories, trying to hold on to what happened, when, and how. I just loved the way that you would, you took observations. You sort of disappeared. Tina, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. I love the way that you took, observations about what it was like to be in that family, and then, or what it's like to kind of write memoir, and then applied it to. Yeah. You kind of used it metaphorically to jump back to characterize your family, and you do that throughout. And even with the sand dollars and the prayer that you read to us, I was just
it was definitely on my mind when I was writing it, like that. How do you not tell a lie when you really can't? You don't have perfect memory. Mm-hmm. And my solution was just admit it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah. I can't say for sure, but this is how I picture it. I've got this scar that I always thought came from that. Like what can you do? But there's that kind of osmosis from your family that you just sort of, things are soaked in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm just going to have you read for me from now on, DJ. You do such a good job.
Well, I like the metaphorical leaps that you make, you know, those connections. If you just would have said, well, I can't be sure, but then you actually make it mean within the family. So it's really nice.
Thank you.
We have some other questions. Jen, do you want to read them, or am I?
Sure, I can read them.
Doing your job? I'll take over. I'm really bossy person, so just say, stop it.
You're an effective leader. We've got some requests that you guys actually read more sections from your book. And in fact, Tina, there's a specific request that you could read that bicycle passage.
Okay, my husband is watching this and he's probably laughing because right before this, I was like, I'm going to read the bicycle thing. And then I changed my mind. Christine, do you mean the scene where my dad taught me to ride a bike? Okay.
Yes.
Are you sure you guys want to listen to me read again? Okay, so this is actually the first 2 pages of the book. And I'm echoing again, so this will be fun. You might not consider my dad a good man, but if you met him, you probably would have liked him. Lloyd was funny, slapstick even, creative and industrious. He was always building or tinkering or exploring. He loved nature and magic, and most of all his children. But Lloyd was never able to take good care of what he loved. Lloyd made things that were so wholly his own, so original and organic to his personality, it was impossible not to be charmed by them. He made little things like whittled wooden animals and seashell creatures. He also made big things. He'd clear a spot in the middle of a dense forest to plant a garden and build a homestead, even cut down and milled trees to frame up his own tavern once. Big or small, each of Lloyd's creations shared his 1970s timberman aesthetic. His self-made life was steeped in an odd combination of rustic logger practicality, honky-tonk hardship, dirty hippie mysticism, beach town kitsch, and carny mobility. Somehow it all worked. People were always enchanted by Lloyd's creations. Lloyd wasn't much to brag about. My dad wasn't not a war hero. Maybe he should have been. He was a natural fighter and often invited the pain and glory of conflict. He wasn't a proud athlete or scientist. He did nothing to influence the course of history or even the politics of the rural towns he lived in. Lloyd didn't work a 9-to-5 job. He didn't pay bills or child support. He didn't have a phone or mailing address. My dad never met my teachers or interviewed boys before they could date me. He didn't drive me to school or teach me to drive, but he did teach me to ride a bike. I'm not sure I would define what Lloyd did as teaching. What he did was dictate one day that I would not go inside to my mom, I would not eat or drink or pee until I rode that damn bike. He didn't offer many instructions. Like most lessons, Lloyd taught with his body. He stood in the road holding a bike we'd borrowed from another family in his logging outfit. I stood beside him, looking up to his eyes. The world smelled like warm pine and drying dirt. I wore pink terry cloth shorts and a tank top striped in pastels. The neat pigtails Mom had put in that morning were now a wild mess around my dusted face. Get on the bike, Lloyd said. Determined not to disappoint my dad, I threw a leg over the bike and slid my bony ass up onto the seat. Lloyd bent behind me, his chest inches from my back, his arms around my own, and his feet firm on the ground to the left side of the bike. He gripped the handlebars on the metal part above my hands and started running. My heart thumped its way up my throat. At full speed, Lloyd released the bike, and yelled, "Pedal!" My feet got tangled or couldn't find the pedals, or I froze. Every time. I fell sideways, scraped away another part of myself. Lloyd jogged over, picked up the bike, and leaned it toward me. Get on the bike. This process repeated as the day expanded out, its boundaries somehow stopping the forward motion of time. I asked for a Band-Aid for my knee because it never had the chance to stop bleeding before hitting the ground again. Lloyd said no. You can have a Band-Aid when you ride the goddamn bike. Get on the bike changed to get on the goddamn bike. Pedal changed to pedal, goddammit. My cheeks burned, and not just because of the sun. I felt like the whole trailer park was watching. Felt sure the other kids were peeking out from behind the trunks of dug firs to witness my humiliating failure. Pure, metallic hate for my dad slid around my heart, and I was sure it would become solid and forever. The road was paved, but breaking up and rutted, covered in scree. After each fall, I stole a few moments to pluck gravel from my skin and try to look pathetic before Lloyd urged me back onto the bike. My palms and knees stung from smacking down on the road. What began as physical pain traveled inside my body and turned to burning thoughts. I wanted Lloyd to be wounded as I was, wished for the strength to make him feel stung. But that was before I actually pedaled. When I landed my feet on both pedals and felt myself pushing that bike forward, the cloud of anger and shame cleared away and I was riding that goddamn bike. My exhaustion evaporated and pedaling came as natural to me as running. The bike was an extension of my body. I understood why Lloyd smiled like an idiot when he leaned his own bike into a slow, wide turn and called out for my big brother Jesse to follow. Until this moment, I'd always stood at the edge of our patch of grass and watched them ride together. But now Lloyd was standing watching me. Now I was riding. Lloyd whooped his joy. "Well, I'll be damned," he yelled. "That's it, honey, you got it. Sure as shit." This time I didn't mind that the whole neighborhood might hear. It was like there was this whole other Tina existed I didn't even know existed. This Tina could power a mighty machine and get places fast. She could escape bad guys or rob a gas station or win a race, who knows? All I knew for sure was that I was going to ride that bike until dark and maybe even after. Never mind the trickle of blood down my shin or the raging thirst that moments ago I thought would kill me. Now I thrust through the warm evergreen air. I created the breeze that dried my sweat and made my scalp tingle, and I liked it. Love for my daddy swelled in my chest, which made me even lighter, faster. Love for the salty tears on my face. Love for the sting of my scrapes. I knew Lloyd had given me a new sort of magic. Then he barked out at me again. "Sweetheart, get inside and get cleaned up. You look like hell." Is that what you meant?
That's the one.
It's really the way everyone learns to ride a bike.
Ultimately.
Do you want me to read a little bit more?
Do you have another section?
Yeah. So another thread in my book is my friend Connie Saylor Johnson, who went missing in October 2018. And she had actually been a pretty important person in the book and helped me navigate the landscape back there as well as dig into history. So there's a present tense narrative that runs through the book. So this is a chapter called Constellation, and I'll just read part of it. Summer 2018. It seems more than a coincidence that a month before Connie went missing, I was on a small commuter boat with a 70-year-old woman, white hair and round red cheeks, whose name I never did learn. A cobalt yoga mat propped next to her deepened her blue shining eyes. A wobbly table, as you'd see in a diner, was wedged between us. She reached across and touched my hand as a mother would. I accepted the gesture of this stranger as the water grew choppy. I was on my way to a writing workshop at a retreat center on Cortes Island, British Columbia. I'd enrolled in the workshop in order to finally organize the wilderness notes, documents, and stories I'd been collecting over the years into a narrative, though I can't explain why I chose this specific workshop at this particular time. The woman was going to a constellation workshop. I'd never heard of it. Like astrology, I said. Nothing like that, she said. It's the most marvelous experience. It was hard to explain, she confessed, but then she went on to describe it in vivid detail as if it wasn't hard at all. Our ancestors have issues, she said, and those issues interrupt the family energy field. She leaned as if in confidence, though the boat carried no one else except the driver. Just like when a tree is stunted, it grows in a gnarly, wounded kind of way. A family can develop like that over centuries. Her hair was bundled into a fuzzy donut on top of her head. It wiggled as the boat bobbed and heaved. There's a protocol to constellation work, she went on. Participants, total strangers to one another, are asked questions by a facilitator. Questions like, who in your family died early, died in childbirth, committed a serious crime, committed suicide, who was murdered, abandoned, isolated, excluded, abused, wrongly accused, institutionalized, who simply disappeared. With these ancestors in mind, one person at a time assigns roles to the other workshop participants, and the role players act out the situation based on what they feel in the moment. As she was explaining, she seemed to sense my skepticism through my narrowed eyes, but also my fascination. I know the power of watching a live play. I've experienced improvisational theater. I tried to envision a spontaneous scene between my grandfather, my grandmother, and the wilderness, to see them standing on stage in an unfolding performance. I had no idea where such a scene would go. It sounds strange, she said, but in the enactment, a whole new energy field is created. People take on roles of ancestors, family friends, even living relatives, parents, siblings, uncles, aunts, and grandparents. They inhabit these roles, though they know nothing about the situation. I noticed her large cradle-like arms freckled against her sleeveless purple smock. Earrings of tiny silver fish curled into themselves. The point is to remember those who have been excluded and bring them back into the family, into the community, and in doing so, to heal the disturbance, she said, like pasts reborn in different lives. I was still thinking of my family, of the wilderness, the topic I'd come to the retreat center to write about. What if a whole history has disappeared, I asked. What if a whole landscape is a mystery? It's the same, she said. The constellation principle applies to histories and places. She said I should really think about switching workshops. And I mean, the reason that the constellation principle kind of weaves through the book is because it was so powerful to me when I went to that retreat, and not just for my family, but for this piece of land, which is, wilderness is such a contested entity in America. I mean, it was, it displaced indigenous peoples. It displaced, people who were living off the land, in trailers or whatever, and set up this, so-called pristine landscape. I mean, to me, wilderness is really important for a lot of reasons, but it still has a bloody contested history. So it just felt so powerful to me, this explanation of healing families, individuals, and landscapes. Yeah.
All right. We were having some technical issues. I was helping someone with in the chat. I think those pieces actually lead into one of the questions that I had prepared. Both of your memoirs center really complicated relationships with a parent in particular. But both of you talk about a really deep sense of belonging that's grown out of that. And I would love to hear a little more about that from each of you, since we've got some time.
You want me to start this time, DJ?
I mean, I'm just read, so yeah, go.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, everyone here probably has a complicated relationship with a parent, but I think this was sort of the meat of the project for me, because I had so much unfinished business with my dad. He was 48 when he died, and I was young. I had a baby and another young child, and just my mind was sort of moving forward, right, through like raising children and stuff, and it was just such a jarring thing to just disrupt. I always thought we'd get to sort of figure out how to be in each other's lives, and I think in my 20s it was easy to just be kind of want to write him off, and I think especially if you grow up poor in America, you really internalize this idea that you have to pull yourself up by your bootstrings and do better. And there's an inherent shame that is automatically attached to being poor. And you really believe that it's something wrong with you, your parents, your family, they made the wrong decisions, and that's why you struggle. And so I think I was a little bit okay leaving him in the past when I was in my 20s and just sort of trying to build this new kind of life, which was obviously a little bit immature. And I've come to a different place now. You know, I say in the book, there's no reality in which I get a different dad. Like, so what I get is to celebrate the good things about him, and I get to keep the magic and the beautiful parts. And I think it really came to me that I wanted to do that in a public way when I saw that my nieces who have parents who struggle are starting to internalize shame in the way I did when I was their age. And I just thought, you know what, is it not enough that people struggle with poverty? Do we have to also make them feel bad about it? Right? And so I just wanted a book where Lloyd does do the bad things Lloyd did, but also he's celebrated because I am better off for having, well, my entire family, because Lloyd was certainly not the only person to struggle. So that was kind of the whole point for me.
Yeah. And that comes across so well, Tina. I mean, I just love how your book, you know, it pulls us, like, we think, oh, Lloyd's such a jerk, and then we're like, oh my God, he's so amazing, and that's
and
how,
then we're like, he's a jerk.
no, but that's how all of us are. You know, none of us are totally consistent. You know, we believe one thing one day and it's the total opposite the next. That's humans, and so that makes him very real and raw and believable and endearing. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was such a great question you asked, Jen. I almost want to ask you that question too, but you know, I've had this feeling, especially toward the end of what I considered the going back to the, I mean, I still go to the Selway, but going back to work on the book and get experiences and observations. When I first went back there, my first time was 2004. I just had this sense that it was a spooky place. I know my grandmother was lonely back there. I know she didn't really like my grandfather. I know that he went off on the trails, especially after she had children, and she felt tied down at this remote, lonely outpost, a Forest Service station. I knew nothing about him, but there was just this silence surrounding him. So the place kind of felt spooky to me, and I kind of was cursing it, like, even though it's gorgeous, I was just like, this is the place that created some kind of a division between people in certain people in the family, and doesn't allow us to achieve intimacy in the way that some families do. Toward the end, you know, 10 or 15 years later, when I had gone back especially with my mom, when they volunteered every fall at this one very remote station, and I went back there every year to stay with them for a couple weeks. And though those were just the sweetest times, and I started to have this feeling like the very land that caused a sort of emotional remoteness had now brought a sense of emotional intimacy. And not only that, it had opened up this whole world of natural and cultural history about environment and place. So I don't think I'm forced. I mean, that's a nice, neat little explanation, and I don't think I'm forcing it, because it really did occur to me over a long period of time. And I think life does work like that. You know, those wonderful reversals are what we hold on to, and that's why you write a story. You know, yeah.
Sure.
All right, got a few more minutes, and we've got a couple of questions over underneath in the question area. quick, possibly fun one. Was it harder to write the easy parts of your story or the difficult parts?
I'm assuming by easy you mean like the traumatic parts. Is that right? I don't know who asked the question.
I don't have a name here.
Is that you, Lydia?
Yeah, she says yes, the trauma. I have a good answer to that, but you go for it, Tina.
You go first.
No, you go now. Well, I think the traumatic parts, they're hard to write when you first write them out on the first draft, but after you start shaping them, it's like art, you're making art.
Yes.
The traumatic parts are easier because they carry this emotional power. They carry this importance.
Yeah.
The boring parts are harder to write because you have to convince the audience that this is important, or you're just like some incident like finding a sand dollar, that you have to work to show the reader that this is important, this is symbolic, this means something. You don't have to work to show what the effect the violence had. So I think that the small insignificant parts are much harder. They require much more crafting and thinking.
Yeah, I would definitely say there, Lydia, I think it's funny you asked this question because you know everything about this book. Of course, maybe you asked it for DJ and you're just like, Tina, I'm so sick of your book. So for me, and I think obviously when you look at the two, there's definitely much more like sort of difficult individualized trauma that I was trying to put on the page. And there was definitely, there are stories in there that I had never verbalized and still haven't. But it's not hard for me. It's just, that wasn't, so I think the difference, Lydia, is there's like the emotional toll that it takes to sort of dig into your past. And then there's just the work of writing. And for me, I always tell my students, especially in creative nonfiction, a lot of them take those classes because they think they're going to write their memoir. And I'm like, if you think you're writing about a certain thing that went on in your life, then go home tonight and write the worst thing. And that's actually how I got the chapter title, The Worst Thing. I always say this to my students, go home and write the worst thing. And if you can do that without just needing to call your therapist, it might be time to write that story. But if not, it's not. And so because I was so far removed from so much that happened in the book, I was ready to, as DJ just so put it perfectly, I was ready to turn it into a made thing, a crafted thing. So I absolutely agree with you, DJ, because the traumatic parts already are infused with drama. And so you have to use kind of the tools of fiction, or at least I choose to, in those less exciting parts and make them pull some sort of weight for the piece.
All right. One more question. One more quick question from Ruth Carnegie. Curious why you called him Lloyd in the book instead of Dad, Daddy, Pops. Did you call him Lloyd when you spoke to him?
So this is actually explained in the book, in the middle of the book, because basically, no, when I was a child, I did not call him Lloyd. I called him Daddy. But there is a point at which the trauma was so great that I had to make that separation. And there's a moment when he becomes Lloyd to me. And so I do definitely toggle back and forth because I think of myself as two separate characters in memoir anytime I'm writing memoir, but especially in this piece, like, because I'm a young child, there's like the child who's living the events, and then there's the and I'm sure this is maybe true for you too, DJ. There's the narrative voice, the person that's sitting at the desk today and reflecting back, and then there's the person who's walking through those scenes, and they're two separate people. So most of the time you're going to hear Lloyd because it's that narrative voice telling the story.
The double vision. I love that about memoir and even fiction that's written in that double vision. That's like my favorite because there's a place to reflect.
Exactly.
There's a reflective voice, but you can also have the narrative voice. You can also jump ahead to present tense. You can fast forward, you can flash forward to future tense. I just think it just really gives the most flexibility in terms of time and reflection and narrative. And I just would never write in anything else.
Yeah, it makes it
even
fun.
fiction. Yeah. It's just
And
so
more textured.
natural. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I totally
Well, I'm
agree.
glad we agree on that too.
We agree on everything.
I know. Yeah. It's been so fun to launch a book along with another great writer, memoirist at the same OSU Press. Thank you so much. They are the best team ever. I just, I've worked with a lot of presses and university presses, and I just love OSU. I just want to wrap them up in a package and keep them forever.
Thank you,
They are the
everybody.
best. It's so true. And I think
Thank you both.
maybe some of our OSU people are on here tonight.
Oh, Marty.
Yes, Marty.
Oh, hi, Marty.
Marty's the best.
I
Marty.
can't believe you would want to see my face any more than you've had to.
Oh, well, when will the recording be available?
So this is embedded. It takes about 5 minutes for it to process, I think. It should be available here, and we're going to have it embedded in our website under the original event, and we'll link to it from our digital event archives as well. It should be already in like 5 minutes, honestly.
Oh, thank you.
It's almost immediate.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jen read both of our books, and got us in conversation, and we had a little meeting, and we just kept talking. We wouldn't stop. It was so great.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, when am I going to see DJ again?
Yes, well, in the post-pandemic world, we'll take a hike.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen and Christine. Yeah.
And Christine.
Yeah. Thank you, Arlene. Some of my cousins from Canada, my husband's cousins from Canada. Thank you, Arlene and Deanna. I so appreciate you, and Dan, and just Brittany, everybody. Thank you. Peter.
All right. I think we are going to wrap it up for the night. Thank you both for all of your time, for your insight, for your generosity. Your stories were amazing, both of them. It was a privilege to read them.
Thank you, Jen.
Again, we have an outdoor market, health and self-care, next Saturday. And then starting the following Tuesday, we're going to be doing a movie club and knit along, scary movies to celebrate Halloween. Information details on both of those are available on our website. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you later.